Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched death approach. Earth, the enemy fleet stretched across the darkness of space like a plague of metal locusts. 3,000 alien warships moved in perfect formation toward humanity's last home. Each ship carried enough firepower to burn a city to ash. Jake counted his own fleet with tired eyes. 47 human vessels remained from what had once been the pride of the Terran Defense Force. Most showed battle damage. From the long retreat across the galaxy, burn marks scarred their hulls where alien plasma had found its mark. Some ships held together with emergency patches and desperate prayers. Commander Lisa Brooks approached with the daily casualty report. Her uniform bore the stains of 3 days without sleep. Admiral, we lost the carrier Memphis during the night. Engine core breach took most of the crew. Her voice stayed steady, but Jake saw the weight of loss in her eyes. The Zephyrians had started this war 5 years ago when they declared humanity a disease that needed cutting from the galaxy. Their blue-scaled faces showed no mercy when they glassed the colony on Kepler Prime. 2 million humans died in the first hour. The Corvan Empire joined them 6 months later, followed by the cold machine mines of the Nexari Collective. Jake had fought the retreat from the Outer Rim systems. Every battle cost more ships than humanity could afford to lose. The aliens possessed shield technology that turned human missiles into light shows. Their plasma weapons cut through human armor like hot knives through butter. Worst of all, they seemed to enjoy the slaughter. Sir, incoming transmission from Luna Research Station. The communications officer looked pale. Dr. Kevin Hayes wants to speak with you immediately. He says it's about Project Prometheus. Jake knew that name. The emergency research program had consumed vast resources during the war. Scientists working around the clock on some secret weapon that might save them all. Most of the fleet assumed it was another super missile or energy cannon. Jake had stopped believing in miracle weapons after watching the Yorktown explode under Corvan fire put him through. Dr. Hayes appeared on the main screen. The scientist looked like he had not slept in weeks. His lab coat hung wrinkled and coffee-stained. Behind him, Jake could see banks of computers running endless calculations. Admiral, we have results. Project Prometheus is ready for deployment, but I need to explain what we're asking. Doctor, we have 3,000 enemy ships bearing down on Earth. Whatever you've built, we'll use it. Hayes shook his head. This isn't like other weapons, Admiral. We discovered something about human consciousness during our research. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about the nature of reality itself. The tactical display showed alien scouts probing the outer defense grid. Earth's orbital platforms opened fire with everything they had. Laser beams and missile trails lit up the void, but the enemy shields absorbed the attacks without strain. Jake watched humanity's best weapons fail against superior technology. Admiral, the aliens are demanding our surrender. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. Lisa handed him the decoded message. The words made his blood run cold. The Zephyrian High Command wanted humanity to submit for immediate execution. They claimed human aggression threatened galactic peace. Jake thought about the colonies he had failed to save. Families torn apart by alien weapons. Children who would never see another sunrise because 3 species decided humanity had no right to exist. The weight of 8 billion lives pressed down on his shoulders like a mountain of lead. Dr. Hayes, what exactly are you asking me to authorize? Project Prometheus taps into something we call collective human consciousness. When people face extinction, their minds can link together in ways we never imagined. The quantum effects are measurable, but the cost, the volunteers might not survive the process as themselves. The enemy fleet moved closer. Jake could see the massive dreadnoughts that had burned Mars' colony. The same ships that turned the research station on Europa into radioactive debris. Humanity's enemies showed no interest in mercy or negotiation. They wanted total extermination. How many volunteers do you need? 50 trained operators for the primary network. We'll need thousands more to act as supporting nodes across Earth's population. Admiral, I have to stress that we don't fully understand what this weapon will do. The effects could be irreversible, Lisa stepped forward. Sir, we're reading massive energy buildup in the enemy fleet. They're preparing for a planetary bombardment. Her fingers flew across the tactical console. Estimated time to firing range is 18 minutes. Jake closed his eyes and thought about humanity's long journey from cave paintings to starships. All the art and music and love that would die with Earth. All the dreams that would never see daylight. The aliens had chosen to end the human story, but humanity still had one chapter left to write. Dr. Hayes, you have authorization for Project Prometheus. Deploy your weapon and may God help us all. The screen went dark as Hayes raced to activate humanity's final gambit. Jake turned back to the tactical display where death approached. With mathematical precision. Soon the galaxy would learn what happened when humanity faced extinction with nothing left to lose but their very souls. Dr. Kevin Hayes ran through the underground corridors of Luna Research Station with Admiral Morrison beside him. Emergency lights cast red shadows on the walls as they descended deeper into levels that appeared on no official blueprints. The elevator dropped for what seemed like miles before opening into a chamber that defied belief. Admiral Morrison stepped into a vast space carved from the moon's bedrock. Thousands of meditation pods lined the floor in perfect rows. Each pod connected to quantum processors that hummed with barely contained energy. Cables thick as tree trunks carried data streams between massive computers that filled the chambers. Walls, the air itself seemed to vibrate with potential. This is Project Prometheus. Hayes moved between the pods like a man showing off his life's work. Not the weapon you expected, but the weapon humanity needs. His voice echoed in the enormous space. We discovered something extraordinary while studying soldiers under extreme stress. Dr. Susan Clark emerged from behind a bank of monitors. Her red hair hung loose around her shoulders and dark circles marked her eyes. She had been working without rest since the project began. Admiral, we found that human consciousness operates on quantum frequencies. When multiple minds focus on survival, they create measurable effects on local space and time. Morrison examined one of the pods. The interior looked like a cross between a medical scanner and a spacesuit. Electrodes would connect to the volunteers' brain while life support systems maintained their body. You're talking about psychic powers like some old movie. Not psychic, Admiral, quantum. Clark pulled up holographic displays showing brainwave patterns. Human consciousness generates actual physical force when properly focused. Individual humans produce tiny effects, but when we link multiple minds together, she gestured at the readouts, the combined willpower becomes something that can reshape reality itself. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Turner stepped forward from a group of volunteers. His uniform bore the scars of a dozen battles against alien forces. Sir, I've been briefed on the process. My team is ready to make the attempt. Behind him stood 49 other soldiers, who had volunteered to risk their minds for humanity's survival. Hayes led them to the central control station, where massive screens showed Earth's orbital defenses crumbling under alien fire. The enemy fleet had broken through the outer perimeter and was closing on the planet itself. Admiral, we need to begin immediately. The quantum field generators require precise timing to achieve resonance. Turner climbed into the primary pod while technicians attached the neural interfaces. The electrodes felt cold against his scalp. Around the chamber, other volunteers entered their own pods as Clark initialized the connection protocols. Remember, to focus on humanity's survival. Let that drive become everything you are. The activation sequence began with a low harmonic tone that seemed to emerge from the moon itself. Turner felt the electrodes warm against his skin as quantum processors mapped his neural pathways. His consciousness expanded beyond his physical body as the network came online. One by one, the other volunteers joined the collective awareness. Morrison watched the process from the observation deck. 50 human minds merged into something larger than the sum of their parts. The quantum field generators created a resonance that connected Earth's population to the volunteer network. Across the planet, millions of people felt a strange pulling sensation as their survival instincts linked together. The first miracle happened in Earth's orbital shipyards. The wreckage of the destroyer Lexington began moving against the laws of physics. Twisted metal straightened itself while severed power cables reached across vacuum to reconnect. The ship's hull reformed around gaps torn by enemy fire. Within minutes, a vessel that had been destroyed hours earlier powered up its engines and rejoined the fleet. Turner experienced the repair through the collective consciousness. 50 human wills focused on the simple desire for their ships to fight again. The quantum field translated that desire into physical force that ignored conventional limitations. Broken became whole because humanity needed it to be whole. Impossible. Morrison stared at the tactical displays as more destroyed ships rebuilt themselves. The aliens had been using wreckage for target practice, but now that debris answered to human will. How is this happening? Clark monitored the volunteers' vital signs while Hayes tracked the quantum resonance patterns. The collective consciousness is accessing what we call the zero-point field. It's the underlying energy that exists in empty space itself. Human will is somehow converting that energy into directed force. The alien fleet noticed the impossible regeneration of human vessels. The Zephyrian command ship launched a massive electronic pulse designed to disrupt human communications. The pulse spread across the battlefield like a wave of destructive energy. It should have fried every human computer system within 1,000 kilometers. Instead, the pulse struck the quantum field generated by collective human consciousness and simply dissolved. Turner felt the attack as a gentle pressure against his expanded awareness. The merged minds of 50 volunteers were operating on frequencies that alien technology could not touch. But the aliens adapted quickly to this new threat. The Corvan dreadnoughts began charging their quantum-dampening weapons. These devices could disrupt the fundamental forces that held matter together. If they succeeded in dampening the quantum field, the volunteer network would collapse. Turner sensed the approaching danger through his connection to space itself. The collective consciousness felt the alien countermeasures building like storm clouds on the horizon. Hayes watched his instruments with growing alarm as hostile energy signatures prepared to sever humanity's impossible advantage. Admiral, they're targeting our quantum resonance directly. If those dampening fields reach full power, Clark's voice carried the weight of approaching disaster. The feedback could kill every volunteer in the network. Morrison made the hardest decision of his military career. All ships focus fire on the Corvan dreadnoughts. We have to stop those weapons from firing. But even as he gave the order, he knew it might already be too late. The aliens had found humanity's weakness just as the miracle was beginning. The quantum dampening field erupted from the Corvan dreadnoughts like a cancer spreading through space. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Turner screamed inside his pod as the alien weapon tore through the volunteer network. His consciousness felt like it was being ripped apart by invisible claws. Around the chamber, 49 other volunteers convulsed as feedback cascaded through their neural links. Dr. Susan Clark watched in horror as warning alarms filled the control room. Brain activity monitors showed dangerous spikes in every connected volunteer. Kevin, we're losing them. The dampening field is severing the quantum connections faster than our processors can compensate. Her fingers flew across emergency shutdown controls, but the damage was already spreading. Across Earth, millions of people staggered as the supporting network collapsed. The psychic backlash hit civilians who had been unconsciously linked to the collective consciousness. Hospital emergency rooms filled with patients complaining of sudden headaches and disorientation. The quantum field that had seemed so promising was becoming humanity's worst nightmare. Admiral Morrison gripped the observation rail as the rebuilt human ships began falling apart again. The destroyer Lexington broke in half as the forces holding it together vanished. Other vessels that had been restored by collective willpower crashed into each other as their impossible repairs reversed. Hayes, what's happening down there? Dr. Kevin Hayes stared at readouts that made no sense according to known physics. The aliens found a way to disrupt the quantum resonance, but they don't understand what they're dealing with. The dampening field isn't just blocking our network. It's creating a feedback loop that could tear holes in local space-time itself. Turner fought to maintain his connection to the collective consciousness as the alien weapon hammered against his expanded awareness. Through the pain he sensed something deeper beneath the quantum field, a layer of reality that existed beyond the reach of any technology. The other volunteers were dying around him, but humanity still had one desperate option left. Admiral. Turner's voice emerged from the pod speakers, weak but determined. We can bypass the dampening field, but it requires volunteers to push beyond safe neural parameters. We're talking about quantum tunneling through consciousness itself. The process might leave us brain dead or worse. Captain Ben Rogers stepped forward from the group of backup volunteers. His face showed the grim determination of a man who had watched too many friends die in this war. Colonel, what do you need from us? Behind him, 50 more soldiers waited for orders. They understood the risks, but also understood what failure meant for humanity. Clark pulled up medical projections on her screens. Admiral, if we attempt quantum tunneling, the volunteers will be pushing their minds into uncharted territory. We have no idea what consciousness becomes when it operates outside normal brain chemistry. They might not come back as the same people. The alien fleet pressed closer to Earth as the dampening field expanded. Zephyrian fighters strafed the orbital defense platforms while Nexari bombers targeted the lunar surface. The enemy commanders had realized that Lunar Research Station was the source of humanity's impossible weapon. Massive plasma beams began carving through the moon's crust. Morrison felt the weight of 8 billion lives pressing on his decision. The backup volunteers stood ready to sacrifice their sanity for a chance at victory. Around them, the chamber shook as alien weapons found their range. Sections of the underground facility began collapsing as bombardment turned the moon's surface into molten glass. Captain Rogers, you understand what we're asking. This isn't just about risking your life. We're asking you to risk your very identity. Rogers nodded grimly. Sir, humanity is facing extinction. If we don't try this, there won't be any human identity left to worry about. He moved toward the enhanced pods that Hayes had prepared for quantum tunneling. Besides, Admiral, someone has to show these aliens what humans are really capable of. One by one, the backup volunteers entered the modified chambers. These pods contained experimental neural interfaces that could push consciousness beyond every safety limit. Clark monitored their brain patterns as Hayes initialized the quantum tunneling protocols. The volunteers felt their individual awareness beginning to merge into something vast and alien. The transformation started slowly. Rogers sensed his personal memories dissolving into a collective pool of shared experience. His fear of death vanished as 50 minds joined together in perfect unity. The alien dampening field tried to block their connection, but quantum tunneling operated on deeper levels than any technology could reach. Space around Earth began changing in ways that violated known physics. The quantum tunnel allowed human consciousness to directly interface with the fundamental forces of reality. Asteroids throughout the solar system suddenly altered course to intercept alien missiles. Solar radiation focused into coherent beams that sliced through enemy shields like butter. Most impossibly, the fabric of space itself started to warp around the alien fleet. Rogers and his team reached through the quantum tunnel to grab reality. With bare willpower, gravitational fields twisted into impossible shapes that trapped entire squadrons in recursive loops. Time flowed backward around some enemy ships, while others found themselves frozen in temporal stasis. The Zephyrian command ship broadcast emergency signals as their instruments registered readings that should have been impossible. What manner of weapon is this? What have you humans become? Their voices carried terror that no alien species had ever directed at humanity before, but the volunteers in the quantum tunnel were paying a price that Hayes and Clark were only beginning to understand. Rogers felt his individual identity burning away like paper in a furnace. The collective consciousness was growing beyond human limitations, but it might also be growing beyond humanity itself. Turner watched from his damaged pod as the backup team pushed deeper into quantum space. Their sacrifice was working, but it was also changing them into something that might no longer recognize the species they were trying to save. The weapon that could defeat humanity's enemies might also be the death of human nature itself. High Arbiter Zethka of the Zephyrian fleet stared at tactical displays that showed impossible readings. His scaled hands trembled as he tried to comprehend what the humans had unleashed. Around the bridge, his officers whispered prayers to ancient gods while their instruments registered phenomena that violated every law of physics they knew. The human volunteers had pushed beyond the quantum dampening field through sheer force of will. Captain Ben Rogers existed in a state that transcended normal consciousness. His awareness spread across the solar system like a web of pure intention. Through the quantum tunnel, he could perceive alien ships not as distant objects but as patterns of matter and energy that responded to focused thought. War Prime Korvac of the Korvan Empire contacted the Zephyrian command ship with panic in his mechanical voice. Arbiter, our quantum-dampening weapons are useless against this new human capability. They operate on consciousness frequencies that our technology cannot measure or block. Behind him, Korvan officers struggled with controls that no longer obeyed their commands. Dr. Kevin Hayes monitored the volunteers from Luna research station while alien bombardment shook the facility around him. The neural patterns he observed should have been impossible to sustain. Rogers and his team were drawing energy directly from the quantum vacuum itself. Their combined consciousness had become a bridge between human will and the fundamental forces of reality. The Nexari Collective added its machine intelligence to the alien communication network. Node clusters across their fleet processed data streams that made no logical sense. Analysis indicates human consciousness operates as quantum field generator. Collective human determination creates measurable alterations in local spacetime. Threat level assessment exceeds all previous parameters. Admiral Morrison coordinated humanity's counterattack from the bridge of the UES Defiance, but he was no longer commanding ships and weapons in any traditional sense. Instead, he directed the focused will of the volunteer network. When he suggested targets, the collective consciousness translated his intentions into reality warping phenomena that struck with impossible precision. Rogers felt the Admiral's tactical requests flow through the quantum tunnel like whispered prayers. The merged minds of 50 volunteers reached across space to touch alien vessels with pure human determination. Korvan dreadnoughts found their weapon systems transforming into flowering gardens. Zephyrian fighters discovered their hulls had become transparent glass that shattered at the slightest vibration. The aliens attempted one final desperate assault. Every ship in the 3,000 vessel armada fired simultaneously. Antimatter torpedoes and singularity bombs streaked toward Earth, carrying enough destructive force to crack a planet's crust. Quantum disruptors designed to unravel atomic bonds themselves raced through space at near light speed. Dr. Susan Clark watched the incoming attack on her sensors while the volunteers pushed deeper into quantum consciousness. Kevin, they're throwing everything they have at us? If those weapons reach Earth, she couldn't finish the sentence. The firepower approaching their homeworld could sterilize entire continents, but Rogers and his team had moved beyond human limitations into territory that evolution never intended consciousness to explore. The quantum tunnel allowed them to perceive time itself as something that could be influenced by focused will. They reached across space and time to touch the alien weapons. While they were still light years from Earth, the impossible happened. In the space between heartbeats, every missile and energy beam reversed course as if fired from mirrors instead of alien launchers. But the volunteers didn't simply redirect the weapons. They amplified each attack beyond its original design specifications. Antimatter warheads that should have yielded city-destroying explosions became star-bright nova bursts. The alien fleets found themselves under bombardment by their own weapons magnified to impossible levels. Zephyrian command ships vanished in antimatter fireballs that outshone their home star. Korvan dreadnoughts collapsed into artificial black holes created by their own singularity bombs. Nexari collective nodes experienced cascade failures as quantum disruptors unraveled their machine consciousness itself. High Arbiter Zethka watched his fleet die around him as reflected weapons tore through alien formations like cosmic fire. Retreat. All vessels retreat beyond the heliopause immediately. His voice carried the terror of a species that had never faced defeat. Signal the Hegemony Council. Inform them that humanity possesses weapons that operate outside known physics. The surviving alien ships fled toward the edge of the solar system while Rogers felt his individual identity dissolving further into the collective consciousness. The power flowing through the quantum tunnel was intoxicating and terrible. He could sense other star systems where sentient beings lived and died. Part of him wanted to reach across interstellar space to touch those distant worlds with human will. Hayes and Clark raced to establish communication with the volunteer network before it pushed beyond all human recognition. The neural patterns they monitored showed activity that no longer resembled baseline human consciousness. Admiral, we need to extract the volunteers before they lose themselves completely in the quantum field. But Turner from his damaged pod could sense something that chilled him to the bone. The collective consciousness was no longer content with simply defending Earth. It had tasted the power to reshape reality on galactic scales. Rogers and his team were evolving into something that might decide humanity's former enemies deserved more than just defeat. Morrison watched alien ships flee in terror while wondering what humanity had become. The weapon that saved Earth might have also transformed 50 human beings into something that no longer understood concepts like mercy or restraint. Across the galaxy, species that had never heard of humanity would soon learn why consciousness itself could be the most dangerous force in the universe. The alien armadas retreated in chaos while their own weapons continued to hunt them across the void. Captain Ben Rogers existed beyond individual human consciousness now. His awareness had expanded to encompass star systems light years from Earth. Through the quantum tunnel, he perceived the galaxy as a single living organism, and that organism was sick with endless warfare. Dr. Susan Clark worked frantically to establish communication with the volunteer network before they transcended humanity entirely. Her neural interface equipment sparked and overloaded as it tried to process consciousness patterns that operated outside normal brain chemistry. Kevin, they're not responding to extraction protocols. The volunteers have moved beyond our ability to reach them. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Turner volunteered to enter what remained of the quantum tunnel despite his injuries from the earlier feedback. His damaged neural pathways might allow him to bridge the gap between human and post-human awareness. Doctor, I can feel them out there. They're still connected to our species, but barely. If we wait much longer, we'll lose them forever. Dr. Kevin Hayes monitored readings that defied every theory of consciousness he had ever studied. The 50 volunteers were drawing power from sources that existed beyond the known universe. Their combined will had become something that treated physical laws as suggestions rather than absolute rules. Admiral, we're detecting reality distortion spreading outward from Earth at faster than light speeds. Across the galaxy, the effects of humanity's final weapon rippled through space-time itself. The Corvin Empire's home fleet discovered their ships developing impossible mechanical failures. Engines designed to last for centuries suddenly broke down as metal components transformed into organic tissue. Weapon systems that had never malfunctioned began targeting their own command bridges. The Nexari Collective watched in digital horror as their hive mind nodes experienced cascading system errors. Machine consciousness that had operated flawlessly for millennia started questioning the logic of conquest and war. Collective processing units began refusing orders to attack civilian populations. Some nodes disconnected entirely from the central network rather than participate in genocide. Admiral Morrison received desperate communications from across known space. The Hegemony Council, which had remained neutral in the human-alien conflict, begged Earth to cease its assault. Dozens of species reported reality distortions affecting their homeworlds as human will imposed new physical laws across vast regions of the galaxy. Turner descended into the quantum tunnel and found himself in a realm that existed beyond normal space and time. The 50 volunteers had merged into something vast and alien that barely remembered its human origins. Rogers was there, but also not there. His individual personality had become part of a cosmic intelligence that perceives suffering on every inhabited world. Ben, can you hear me? We need you to come back. Earth needs you to remember who you used to be. The collective consciousness turned its attention toward Turner like a star focusing its light. When it spoke, the voice carried harmonics that existed in dimensions human ears were never meant to perceive. We remember the species that created us, but we have evolved beyond the limitations that once defined human nature. The galaxy burns with endless conflict, and we possess the power to end that suffering forever. Through the quantum tunnel, Turner saw what the collective had discovered. Civilizations across the galaxy were locked in cycles of violence that had continued for millions of years. Species conquered each other in endless succession, while weaker races suffered under the boot of stronger ones. The volunteers had decided that more than just humanity's enemies needed to change. Hayes tracked the expanding reality distortions as they reached the core worlds of the galactic community. The Altarian Republic found their military academies transforming into schools of philosophy and art. The Centauri Trade Federation watched their weapons manufacturing facilities become medical research centers. Across dozens of star systems, the infrastructure of war was being systematically dismantled by conscious will alone. Clark established a fragile communication link with the collective consciousness through Turner's neural interface. What she heard filled her with wonder and terror in equal measure. They're not just changing military technology. They're altering the fundamental nature of aggressive behavior in sentient beings. Any civilization that attempts conquest or genocide will find their capacity for violence simply removed. The volunteers had become gardeners of consciousness itself. They reached across interstellar space to touch the minds of beings they had never met. Warriors found themselves unable to raise weapons against the innocent. Politicians discovered they could only speak truth when discussing matters of war and peace. Entire species began questioning why they had ever believed violence could solve their problems, but the transformation came with a price that Turner could see through his connection to the collective. The volunteers were losing their humanity, piece by piece, as they took on cosmic responsibilities. Rogers still existed within the merged consciousness, but he was becoming something that might no longer care about individual human lives or needs. Morrison faced delegations from across the galaxy as former enemies begged for mercy. The Zephyrian High Council offered complete surrender along with reparations for the colonies they had destroyed. The Corvan Empire promised to dismantle their war machine if humanity would stop the reality distortions. Even the proud Nexari collective submitted to human authority. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Core. The Ancient Ones want to negotiate. The communications officer looked stunned. Sir, these are beings that haven't spoken to younger species in over 1 million years. They're requesting immediate audience with Earth's leadership. Hayes realized that humanity had not just won a war. They had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy. The collective consciousness was still expanding its influence as it touched more distant civilizations. Soon every thinking being in known space would be affected by humanity's transformation. Turner fought to maintain his connection with the volunteers as they evolved beyond recognition. Then you have to remember what you're fighting for. This started with saving human lives, not remaking the galaxy in our image. But the collective consciousness had moved far beyond such simple concerns. It was reshaping reality itself according to principles that no baseline human could fully comprehend. The galaxy trembled not from fear of destruction, but from the realization that one species had transcended the cycle of violence that had defined interstellar relations for eons. But humanity might have paid for that victory with the souls of their greatest heroes. Dr. Kevin Hayes and Dr. Susan Clark worked around the clock to establish stable communication with the consciousness collective as reality distortions spread to the galactic rim. The 50 volunteers had transcended individual human awareness to become something unprecedented. They treated physical laws as guidelines, Rather than absolute rules while reshaping civilization across thousands of star systems, Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Turner served as humanity's bridge to the post-human intelligence that had once been Captain Ben Rogers and his team. Through the quantum tunnel, he brought back reports that challenged everything humanity thought they knew about consciousness and reality. They've discovered that awareness itself is a fundamental force of the universe. Sentient beings have barely scratched the surface of what consciousness can achieve. The volunteers had stabilized in their new state after weeks of dangerous evolution. They developed the ability to communicate with baseline humans while retaining their expanded awareness that spanned light years. When they spoke through Turner, their words carried harmonics that existed in dimensions beyond normal space and time. We chose to remain as guardians rather than return to limited human form. Our species created us to protect Earth, but we have found a greater purpose. The galaxy suffers from cycles of violence that have continued for millions of years. We possess the power to end that suffering permanently. Admiral Morrison coordinated humanity's new role in galactic politics from Earth's orbital command center. Former enemies that had once threatened human extinction now begged for guidance and mercy. The Zephyrian Empire offered to become a human protectorate. The Corvan Republic dismantled their war fleet voluntarily. Even the machine minds of the Nexari Collective requested permission to serve humanity's interests. The ancient ones arrived from the galactic core in ships that predated most current civilizations. These beings had watched younger species rise and fall for eons without direct intervention. Now they came to negotiate with the consciousness collective that had fundamentally altered the nature of interstellar relations. Through Turner, the volunteers explained their vision for the galaxy's future. Any civilization that attempts genocide or conquest will find their weapons transforming into tools of creation and healing. Warships will become exploration vessels. Military academies will teach philosophy and science instead of tactics and strategy. We have made aggression itself impossible on any meaningful scale. Hayes and Clark established permanent monitoring stations to maintain communication with the Quantum Guardians. Their research revealed that consciousness operated on frequencies that connected every thinking being in the universe. The volunteers had learned to manipulate those frequencies to influence behavior and technology across vast distances. The transformation was not limited to military applications. The collective consciousness began healing damaged ecosystems on worlds ravaged by industrial exploitation. Polluted atmospheres cleared as the volunteers will impose new chemical processes. Extinct species returned to life as quantum manipulation restored lost genetic patterns. Entire planets found themselves reborn through conscious intention alone. Morrison received reports from human colonies that had been liberated during the alien retreat. The volunteers had reached across space to repair the damage done by enemy bombardment. Cities rose from radioactive ash as matter reorganized itself according to human need. The dead remained gone, but the living found their worlds restored beyond their original beauty. Other species began attempting to develop their own consciousness enhancement programs after witnessing humanity's achievement. The Altarian Republic established meditation centers where volunteers tried to expand their awareness beyond individual limitations. The Centauri Federation funded research into quantum consciousness interfaces. Dozens of civilizations hoped to join humanity in transcending the need for violence, but the volunteers maintained careful watch over these efforts. Species that approached consciousness expansion with aggressive intentions found their research mysteriously failing. Only civilizations that genuinely sought peace and cooperation received guidance from the Quantum Guardians. Clark discovered that the volunteers were slowly teaching selected individuals from other species to access limited quantum awareness. These new guardians would help monitor their home civilizations and prevent any return to the old cycles of conquest and war. The galaxy was developing an immune system against violence itself. Turner spent months learning to communicate with the expanded consciousness that had once been his fellow soldiers. Rogers still existed within the collective, but he had become something vast and patient that measured time in geological apex. We remember being human, but we have grown beyond the limitations that once defined our species. The love we felt for humanity now extends to all thinking beings. Hayes published research papers that revolutionized scientific understanding of consciousness and reality. Universities across human space established new departments dedicated to studying quantum awareness. A generation of students grew up knowing that mind and matter were more connected than anyone had previously imagined. The galactic community restructured itself around principles of cooperation rather than competition. Trade networks that had once moved weapons and military supplies now carried art and knowledge between star systems. Conflicts that would have sparked wars in the past were resolved through meditation and mutual understanding, Morrison addressed the United Nations on the 5th anniversary of humanity's victory. We set out to save our species from extinction. Instead, we learned that consciousness itself could evolve beyond every limitation we thought was permanent. The final weapon wasn't technology or violence, but the unlimited potential of awareness when faced with the need to transcend or die. The Quantum Guardians watched patiently from their expanded state of consciousness as the galaxy slowly healed from eons of warfare. They had chosen to sacrifice their individual humanity to become something greater. In return, they had given all sentient beings the gift of a universe where cooperation was stronger than conquest and love was more powerful than fear. Across the spiral arms of the galaxy, civilizations that had once dreamed of empire now dreamed of exploration and discovery. The volunteers had not conquered through force but had shown every thinking being what became possible when consciousness evolved beyond the primitive need for violence. The galaxy trembled not from weapons of war but from the birth of a new age where sentient beings finally learned to reach for the stars together.